So everyone, my name is Ivis. I'm a senior product expert here at ZoomCharts, and today we're going to go through the Onyx data challenge for the electronics products ratings and reviews. With that dataset, we're going to work with it a little bit and talk about also a few things that we could do with the data, not just with the dataset, but with visuals that ZoomCharts is providing. So a couple of ground rules before we jump straight into that is, remember, if you do have any questions, you are more than welcome to ask them. There is one thing that I'm a firm believer of, and that is that there is no such thing as stupid questions. Everybody has their own pace on how they learn things. Everybody is at a different level. So if you do have any questions and if you just want to ask for opinion, feel free to post it in the Q&A section of the chat. Why the Q&A section of the chat? Because it's going to be easier for me to follow through and make sure I answer all of your questions. If it's just a general comment that you want to put out there, you can easily use the chat for that as well. What else? Everybody who has joined the session is going to be able to see everything live. For those of you who have friends, for example, who weren't able to join, or if you just want to review this afterwards when you have more time to kind of go at your own pace, remember that you are going to have a follow-up from ZoomCharts, which is going to include also the link to the recording. So yes, the session is recorded. You're going to have a recording where you can go through it afterwards. I just got back a message from the team. Hey, David, it seems like we have sent you the feedback. So if you haven't received it, please send a message to webinars@zoomcharts.com. So if one of my colleagues could just post in the email address where David needs to send in, that would be perfect. So yeah, just send us a message, welcome to the also one of the greatest things about 21st century, right? The spam filters and everything. So but it does seem that we have sent you a feedback. So reach out to us and we're going to send it in the under forms if it's necessary. Yeah, so questions, if you have any, feel free to post them in the Q&A section. If you have any comments, post them in the general section of the chat. What else there? Recording, you're going to have a link to it so you can watch this session afterwards as well. What else? What the session is all about? The main thing about these sessions and the event in general is we're creating an environment where you guys can learn. And one of the things that we're trying to do now is we're trying to experiment more with real life data sets and actual reports, which are common nowadays. And this is one of the examples, right? So we're working on product ratings and reviews. So nowadays, we're going a lot more digital than we used to, right? So previously, everything was more word of mouth. Well, for example, how you perceive the product and your friends and colleagues were listening to your reviews and your kind of opinion about certain things. Nowadays, a lot of people are just checking out not just comments, but also ratings, reviews, video reviews, and a lot of different other options on how to see if that thing that they're planning to buy is worth it, right? So a lot of companies are creating dashboards with reviews, rating data, and that sort of stuff, which is one of the reasons why it is how it is. Now, with it, what also comes is one of the main challenges that you're always going to face as a data visualization or data engineer or anybody who works with Power BI is going to be data cleaning. And this is one of the things that you're going to notice about this sample of data in particular. It is in no shape or form clean data. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. There's a lot of things that you can, let's say, do additionally to improve the quality of the report, the data set itself, the usability of it, and so forth. So this data set itself, I would say, sure, the names and these things are, randomized, but the main idea here is exactly the same as you would have in other companies. Trust me, it is not all nicely, neatly, tidily placed inside of a database. The reality is, well, as soon as you give free-form options to users, you get a lot of weird stuff there. You have to figure out on how am I supposed to handle this, how do we sort this, how do we store this, and so forth. So the data looks kind of close to the actual reality. That's why you also have some blank values. That's why in some cases you have some weird characters, random characters, and these sort of things. But yeah, so what else we can do is I'm going to quickly share the screen. Let me just take one tab to the second screen so it's a little bit easier. Let's go for the entire screen, share it, double checking to make sure that you guys see everything. Perfect. So for those of you who, for example, are new and this is one of your first challenges, one thing to always remember is you can always access the data set for the challenge. And if there's any additional information for it, you can also find it in the challenge page. Now, where is the challenge page? Once you open up the ZoomCharts website, right here at the top menu, you have challenges. We click on that. We right here see Onyx Data Challenge for February 2024. We click on Learn More. You can see we can sign up. This is also the form where you can sign up and afterwards access also your developer account. The developer account gives you access to all of ZoomCharts visuals for the purpose of usage in these sort of challenge reports. So for example, I'm going to sign in with my account. Well, that would be awkward if I would showcase my password, right? I'm not going to save anything. I know my password. Of course, I agree to the terms and conditions. And here you can see I can submit a report and I can also see my developer's license. For those of you who are new, this is going to say activate my developer's license. I think that's what it says. It changes from time to time, not 100% sure, but close to that. So get developer's license, see my license, there's going to be an option right here. What else? If we scroll down a bit more, you can read about the challenge. You can read about the segment of how to participate and the judging criteria. So we have also made changes to these sort of layouts and UI here to make sure that it's a lot easier for you guys to find information. On the left-hand side, you can find the timeline of the event. So you can see when the event has started, when are the workshops, when are the mentoring sessions, when is the deadline for the submission, and when's the winner announcement, and all the goodies. At the bottom, of course, you can find the most important thing about all of this is the dataset. Also, if you missed this part, if we scroll down here on the left hand, you can see I can also access my license here. I can also book a session with myself because, who's a better guy to judge than myself? But what's also good about this is right here, you can see all the upcoming events. So for example, right now we're on this event right here. And on the 29th of February, you can see that we're going to have the winner's announcement. So what's also good about the challenge section, and this is something I also mentioned the previous time, is if you go to the challenges, and if you scroll down a bit more, you can actually find previous challenges that we have hosted together with our partners. So for example, if we're sticking to Onyx Data, let's open up the January contest for Onyx Data. And you can also actually see here the winning report and all the submissions that people have submitted. The reason why I'm telling you about this again and again is, remember, look at all of this information as sort of a, let's say, a cradle of information where you can get inspiration. You can see what visuals people use, what interactions they use, what navigation could be used. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is exactly what you need to recreate. No, never think about it that way. Think about it as just a source of inspiration. Trust me, every single one of us who has worked with Power BI, we have our own folders or links or bookmark kind of folders where there's a bunch of different reports where we have something specific that we noticed and thought like, well, that's kind of cool. I want to recreate it. I don't necessarily have time for it right now, but we save it for later. And then we try to understand, okay, what visual they used, how did they achieve this? If it's necessary, we reach out to the author. And this is also something that you can do here. So for example, if we open up the winner for the previous month's challenge, you can see here, you can download the PBIX, so you have access to the raw data and the file itself. And you can also reach out to the actual author of the report. This is why we're asking for your LinkedIn, because this is a great way for you to also get recognition for your work, right? We're not going to say, hey guys, we created all of this. No, you guys created it. We're giving you all the credit for it. We're just showcasing it in our gallery so you get more exposure for it. So that's also a good thing. And you can always reach out to the author and say, hey, I noticed you did this. Any chance you could just tell me how did you achieve it, or what visuals should I take a look at, and these sort of things. So don't worry about these. Because the worst thing that could have happened when you reach out is what? He's not going to reply to you? Well, it's not like you lost something, right? It's an opportunity you took. Maybe it's a hit, maybe it's a miss. Who knows? But you have an option to do it. All right. So you have all this information here, you have the challenges, what else under resources, you can find also other webinars, you can find blog posts, other report samples, and there's just a bunch of different stuff that you can do. Now, one last thing before we go into the data set, and this is going to be kind of a transition into it, is if we open up the current challenge data set, and if we download the data set, you're going to see I'm going to actually download a zip folder. Within that zip folder, I'm going to have two things. I'm going to have the raw data set, and I'm going to have a cheat sheet. So the cheat sheet is something that our team created specifically for contestants. So it's a lot easier for you guys to understand what visuals could be replaced with one of ours. For example, the combo can recreate anything that you can do with the native visuals with columns, areas, lines, stacked columns, clustered columns. There's just a bunch of different ones. And this sort of a cheat sheet allows you to kind of quickly look at it and see, for example, if you have just a regular line chart, how can I replace it with one of the ZoomCharts visuals? If I'm using a timeline, for example, which visuals could be used or what can you replicate and that sort of stuff. So don't forget, there's just a bunch of different resources that we have created for you guys to have as much, let's say, advantage as possible and as much inside information as possible. There's also the academy, there's the documentation, there's a bunch of different stuff that you can look into to get to the one result. All right, what else? Well, nothing really. Now we're going to go into the data set itself. So for the data set itself, let's go here, open up the report, and let's look at the Excel file itself. So what do we have within it? We have two different sheets. We have the actual data set, and we have a data dictionary. Now, the one thing that I usually do with the data dictionary is a lot of people usually just disregard this, and they just don't load it into Power BI. What I do is I usually load it into Power BI, but I keep it hidden. But the reason why I load it into Power BI is because it allows me to quickly check what was the definition of the column. So for example, let's say, I'm going to quickly get back my screen just to make sure that you guys see what I'm showing. Yep, perfect. So let's say, for example, I'm starting to build a new visual, right? I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, I want to create a donut chart. Cool. Now, what do I have? I see the columns and I see a brand and manufacturer number. Okay, what's the main difference between a brand and manufacturer? Let's go into the table view. Since I have the dictionary, I just click on it as a source, and I look at the definition of the columns. So the thing that I was looking for is, so brand is brand name of the product, whereas the manufacturer is the manufacturer field with unknown if missing. Okay, so it means that essentially a manufacturer could have multiple brands underneath it, not the other way around, right? Or the other way around, doesn't specify here, but it allows me to at least understand and grasp, okay, what sort of information is it going to be storing? The cool thing about this is that also in this case, you have data types, which is good because it allows you to at least start to think about the back end of it. You're not always going to have this, but one of the things that I did when I started off with Power BI is I actually created these sort of definition files for myself. So for all the sources that I was using, I created a separate table where I explained what each column represented, what sort of data type was in it. And also what I did is sample data entry. I also created a simple entry where I could quickly check, okay, so how does it actually look like? Is it like a unique string? Is it a name? Is it text? Is it number? Because string, datetime, it's data type itself, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to understand, okay, but how is it stored? So that sort of stuff. So it's just something that allows you to go back and forth to understand, okay, what am I looking for? What can I do with it and so forth. For example, we can see here also there's a lot of information regarding the reviews. The title, text, rating, was it helpful or not, and that sort of stuff. If I wouldn't have the definition file, it would be kind of hard for me to understand quickly what is, for example, review text. I assume so, right? Not always, but these things help you a lot. Now, when it comes to the data set itself, what I did in this particular case is, as you can see, I haven't really done the cleaning up of it, which in real life scenario would be a big no-no. The reason for that is because you want to make sure that your reports are working as fast as possible, right? And for those of you who are new to Power BI, for those of you who have been working with it, you know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who are new, since we don't really have, 2 hours where I can go through it and explain everything, one thing that I would highly recommend for newer, let's say, Power BI developers to do is to look at this free resource. So SQL BI. SQL BI is run by two amazing gentlemen, Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari, who are typically considered, you know how we have tiers of experts? So yeah, these guys are in the guru tier. So they know what they're talking about. And what they have is a lot of information regarding the modeling, the DAX, and so forth. And they also offer some basic courses free of charge. So what I usually recommend every single person who's starting off with Power BI, or even those of you who have been working with Power BI, these three, well, the DAX tools is maybe something you don't necessarily have to do in the beginning, but introduction into data modeling and introduction into DAX is just a basic necessity I always recommend for newer users to go through, watch, and just understand the basic concepts of it. So I'm going to quickly also paste the URL in the chat. So you can use that whenever you have the time. Again, it's an online material, so you could use it at whatever time you're feeling comfortable with it. Now, if we look at the data set itself, I'm going to open up Power Query. You can see I did a couple of things, but I'm going to go to the very beginning, sort of like how it looks raw. And one of the things and the reasons why I went here is because if you look at the data dictionary, and this is one comment that started me thinking, okay, there's probably going to be things that I need to readjust here. If you look at the categories, see column, category, and the description is the categories of the product belongs to, often separated by commas, which means that one product doesn't have one specific category that it falls into. A product could have multiple categories that it belongs to. And on the original data set, if you look at the categories, we can see that, okay, some of them are nice and neat, but, okay, I'm already using the split version, but if I go to the original one, you can see this is kind of what we're facing. Accessories, portable power banks, portable chargers is just one single item, but it has a lot of different categories within it. And I can't really use the concatenated version with all these different categories in a single box, because if we would use it as a slicer, I can't really, make the user read through 50 words in order to find, for example, TVs, right? So one of the things that you can do here is you can right click on a column, split column by delimiter. Yeah, it's going to say that I'm going to break a step. Sure, I'm going to just remove it afterwards. So I'm going to say that the delimiter is comma. I'm going to make sure that I'm splitting up on each occurrence of the delimiter. And here is one of the magic things that Power BI allows us to do. You have two options on how you want to split. You want to either split them into individual columns, which is not something I want to do. I do not want to have 29 extra columns. I actually want to have better 29 new rows. And once you do that, basically what Power BI does for you is it takes all of those entries that you had comma separated and creates a new row as an entry point for those unique categories. Now remember, every single time you do a split by delimiter, or in any other way you split a column, one thing to always remember to do is go under Transform section, Format, and Trim. For those of you who don't know, what trim does is, let me get the tooltip, there we go, removes leading and trailing spaces. So basically what it ensures is, if you look at the values right here, you can see that mice and joysticks, they start a bit further than keyboard. That is because when I split them, there's actually a space that was taken with it. And within Power BI, if you have the same value with space and without space, those are going to be considered two different values. So you want to make sure that you remove all the spaces that are between text, sorry, not between, but before text and after text. What stays is the spaces in between. That's all fine, but you want to remove everything prior and after the actual text. So format and trim does the job for you. That allows you to get those unique entries. Now, once we do this, one of the typical, reactions we get from users might be, yeah, but what you just did is basically multiplied one single entry by X, right? Because every single one of them is a new row, which now makes the total, or the total number of rows, completely different from what it used to be. Exactly. Yes, that's not a problem, because we do have other measures. We can use distinct count to find the unique entries. We can create unique identifiers to identify specific entries in a specific row. There are ways on how you can handle this, but you need to think about it like this. It's always a lot better to have a data table which is long and narrow rather than wide and short. So it's one of the things to remember. Yes, Aman, you're gonna have a recording after the webinar. You're gonna have a link where you can able to access the recording. All right, so we can split these values. We can look at the colors, and in colors, we actually have the same thing. See, we have some individual color values, for example, just black or black ash. Then we have black, black, gray, red, blue. So multiple colors. Similar principle, we need to split them. Otherwise, you're just basically getting a very long name for one of the entries, and you're not really looking at the individual entry point. So there's a lot of things that you need to do in that sense. What else is there? Once we go, for example, into colors, because I also did some analysis on the colors when I was playing around, you can see we have null, which basically means that there is no color assigned to it. Now, unless this is something you want to have specifically in your reports, my recommendation usually is never keep a null entry as such. What I always recommend to do better is replace the null with, for example, something like unspecified, not specified, undetermined, whatever it is, but just don't leave it blank. Because it's a lot harder for users to notice blank values, whereas if it would be just nicely positioned and showcasing, for example, not specified, undefined, or something like that. It's a lot easier for user to understand it. A great example for it would be, let's go back to the report. So for example, we had the donut right here. And let's say we wanted to look at the colors. Let's see how it goes. So colors, we're going to be using the unique identifier distinct count. And you can see I already did it here. So it says not specified. And it's a lot simpler to understand. Okay, so the color isn't really specified, right? Quite simple. If I wouldn't have this step done, that's the last step right here. If I remove this last step and I apply the changes and send it to Power BI, the waiting game, we all love it. There's nothing you can do about it. This is the time where you take a drink, take a sip, and just relax for a bit. Unfortunately, you can't really skip them. You can skip them in the recording, but when it's the actual data you're working with, it doesn't really help you, right? There we go. Now, if I go back to the report, even if I make it larger, I think most of you will agree with me that having just a random 29.49% doesn't really tell me a lot of information. The user still needs to kind of think about it and understand, oh, it means that nothing was provided there. So it's just a let's say a good practice to not leave blank values unless this is something that you're specifically going after, because the users can understand the charts a lot better when it clearly says not specified, undefined, or something like that. So those are just small little things. What else? If we look at the data, we have different dates. So we could theoretically also create a date table for a lot of the dimensions. Like I mentioned in the data dictionary, for example, we have a lot of information regarding the reviews. We have a lot of information regarding the products, for example, the brand, the manufacturer, the color, and so forth. So you could create dimensional tables, which would allow Power BI to handle all the requests a lot faster, but it's not something that you do on the very first day when you start off with Power BI. So for those of you who are new, you can easily keep using and expanding the same table. For those of you who want to challenge yourself a bit more, create an actual data model. Because having what I have right here, right now, just a single table, isn't really a data model, right? It's not a sufficient data model. It's just a data source. A data model would mean that I would have a fact table and I would have multiple dimensions. So always think about that as well. Now, going back to the data itself, what I wanted to cover more is if I go through it, one thing, yeah, you can also notice here, you can see we have column keys where there's just one distinct value because I'm profiling the first 1,000. If I profile the whole data set, there's going to be like 50, I think. Let's just give it a second. Yeah, 50 distinct values. And I first noticed them like, okay, so we have some unique identifier. I go to the data dictionary and there's no keys column whatsoever. So since I'm not the original author of the report, or the data set, I should say, I have no idea what keys actually stands for. So it's a column I'm not going to use until I know what it does or what it means or what it's supposed to be, used for. So always look at all the columns and make sure you understand what it represents, what sort of data it has in, and so forth. So we have the manufacturer number, which represents the manufacturer plus the unique identifier for the product. We have the names of the product. We have the review dates, the scene dates, again, something we could split individually to understand whether or not it was helpful, the review ratings, the URLs for it as such. Okay, went through it all. And one of the things that I noticed, and this is just something you start to do once you have more and more experience, right? So for example, we have a column called reviews rating. Now, whenever something is speaking about or mentioning ratings, my mind straight forward goes to stars, right? It's something that we're used to. Every single time we see a review, there's going to be a star rating. So one of my thoughts here is, okay, I'm going to have these numbers, but how do I replace this with stars? Because I could theoretically do it, right? And the first thing that, I did, for example, just to see if it could be possible, is I create a regular table. I add the review ratings. I can see we have also some blank values and we have individual ratings. I'm also going to add it once more to have a distinct count, just to make sure that there's no null values there. Cool. I'm going to add also review IDs and give it distinct count. So how many reviews are there in particular category? So my first thought process is, but wait, Power BI has this amazing feature where I can conditionally format one column and add icons to it. And I could define, for example, what rating goes where. But if I look at the styles, we have stars, but there's only 3 of them. I could add more, but even this doesn't really allow me to have that full control over having 5 different stars, right? So first thought process is, well, damn, I can't really do that. I could do something like progress bars or this radial donut chart or something like that. I could investigate if it's possible to add custom icons. I can tell you up front, it is possible. But I can also do one of the most straightforward things. And that is go to the visual library that Power BI offers you, use the search and just say ratings. And we can see that there is one by TME AG and MACU LLC. This is the one I already have added to the report. I can quickly open it up, see the basic idea about it, see the image. So basically it gives you a number and it colors it accordingly. Seems pretty straightforward. If only it would allow me to close the image, that would be amazing. There we go. That's the Power Query. Let's go back to the report. There we go. So you can see I added right here. And what it basically does is it allows me to have a visual where I can input the value. Right now it's counting the reviews. So of course it's more than 5, meaning that it's going to be 5 stars always. Even if I choose 1, for example, you can see that I still have more entries than it would be necessary. So what I do here is I go with the average. So it's now calculating the average across all these ratings. And if I choose just one of them, it's going to represent one specific category. This is one of the options. Alternatively, you could also do something like creating a conditional column where you can do something like this and say that you want to replace 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It essentially defines how many stars you're going to have, and then you input a star symbol. You can also reference a UTF character, but if you want to use an emoji, you can do this by using Windows plus dot period, Windows plus period symbol, and it gives you the emoji list. So for example, if I use a heart, let's say I want to replace the stars with a heart. We're creating a Valentine's report right now, right? You can say this is what I get. So there are multiple ways on how you can tackle these. So star rating is just something that comes with reviews, I think. Now, once we talked about the data source itself, once we talked about, for example, things like ratings and so forth, what can we do with the data that's available to us? And this is kind of a one option of what I did here, right? This isn't necessarily the best one or the only one. It's just something I've put together for you guys to showcase. And before we go into actually deep diving into the visuals individually, one thing I wanted to mention is do always make sure that you double check if you're showcasing the count or distinct count. Because for example, if I change this, or even if I create a new card, right? Let's create a new card. So that's a new card. I'm gonna give it a bit more space here whilst we're playing around with it. So, and I'm gonna have ID, double check. ID is unique identifier for each product entry. Okay, I'm gonna be using ID, so that's always giving me first because it's a text and a card can display text, so I need to switch it out. If I change it to count, it's gonna be 206,000, which means that I have basically 206,000 rows. It does not mean that I have 206,000 products. I need to make sure that I'm looking at distinct values. Distinct means unique. So I only have 50 products in those 206,000 rows. The reason why I'm emphasizing on this again is because from the submissions that I've seen so far, this is one of the mistakes that a couple of them have made. Either it's on the product or it's on the reviews count cards or brand cards or whatever, but I have noticed this. This could be just an oversight, but I think you can agree with me that having, for example, right now we're looking at counter reviews, right? There is a bit of a difference of 206,000 and 7,000. And, you know, just a couple extra 100K, 200K, not big a difference. Trust me, that's a major difference, especially once we're talking about money, right? So make sure you're always choosing the right aggregation for the numbers, that you're looking at unique entries and not just counting them upwards. So as far as the visuals go, we're going to recreate this page. So I'm not going to recreate the cards, but I'm going to recreate the timeline chart. So for the timeline chart, what I did is I wanted to make sure that the user has an option of just looking at the timeline and seeing, for example, how many products are there on a specific timeline and how many of them are getting reviews and how many reviews are available in each period of time. So for my date hierarchy and date value x-axis column fields, what I add is going to be the review date. And I just add the same date in both entries. You don't necessarily need to split them. The main difference between these two is that the date hierarchy, as the name kind of implies, it allows you to define the specific units. So in this case, I'm using a regional report. Unfortunately, I forgot to switch it up. So I have it in Latvian, but it essentially says year, quarter, month, day. I could also have individual columns for that, but I define the hierarchy levels here. And here I'm using just a regular date field again, and that allows me to connect the date to the levels of the hierarchy. So I have these two. The legend, you know what the legend does if you've created any of the native visuals. The series are the values that I'm going to be plotting. And in this case, I'm going to be using my product ID as one of the identifiers that I want to plot on the axis. So you can see, for example, I'm also going to add a quick card just because it's going to be a lot easier to see a card in the number in the card than to try to figure out how much is there. So if I choose this one, there's 34 unique products that have been reviewed in 2016, 2017, 2018. Take multiple of them. This is how many products have been reviewed in the time of 17 and 18 together. So that sort of stuff. Okay, so that defines the product. Now, the other thing that I want to see, as I mentioned, is I want to see how many reviews have been posted in the same period of time. So in order to do that, I needed to create a column that allows me to identify each unique review. And if we look at the original data source, I'm not even looking at the data set. Again, I'm looking at the dictionary because here I have all the definitions. So I'm looking here and I see, okay, review date. This is the date when it was created. Okay. The recommendations, it could be a flag, but was it helpful? Not really. The rating, 1 to 5, doesn't really help me. The text could be very long, so I don't want to use that. There's a title. Okay, that's something. There's also a username. Okay, and we have a product ID. So what I did is I created a new column. Let me just increase the size of it for you guys to see. And I'm using a DAX function called combine values, which allows you to define a delimiter, and then you define what columns from your dataset are going to be combined together. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm taking the unique product ID, I'm taking the username of the user who left a review, and I took the review date. And I'm doing that to create a unique column, which is somewhere here at the end. There you go. And that is how it looks like. So that is my unique identifier for the review itself. If I wanted to make it even more detailed, I of course could add something like the color, the rating itself. So the more detailed it is, the more precise it's going to be, but you don't necessarily always need to have it too precise to the very last detail. In most cases, you need to be able to just distinguish between the options that are available for you. So, oh, sorry, did not mean to press that. So we have here the timeline where I have my count of IDs. I have my unique column for the review ID. I use it in series 2. Of course, it's going to give me an error because first review ID is going to be a text, so I can't handle it. I just converted it into count of text. Okay, so I have a chart. Now, if I look at this, I think most of you will agree with me that visually this doesn't really help me a lot, right? Because we see the number of reviews now, but the count of products is pretty much the same all across the board, even though we just saw that it's not really the case. So what we do here is we go to formatting options. We go to series 1 configuration, or actually series 2 configuration, because we're going to adjust the orange columns that we have here. And I'm going to scroll down a bit and say that the reviews are actually going to be sitting not on the primary value axis, but on the secondary. So it's now assigned to the secondary axis, but we don't see it yet because I have to enable it. So now I could go and say that the primary axis is product count. So we are giving it a name. We could also assign a color to it. That would also allow the users to distinguish a little bit better. But it's, again, completely visual thing that it's completely up to your decision on how you want to style it. What I would recommend is probably assign the colors close to the original one. So it's a lot easier for user to, even without reading the names, he can understand where it comes from. And this one is going to be the review count. And we can see the difference here. So now we can actually see both trends. And in this case, for example, we can see that there's actually relatively sized, there's more products than reviews if you compare them to other times in period. So that's one of the things. What else is there? We had there also a waterfall chart. Okay, so for the waterfall, one of the things that I wanted to focus on is I wanted to allow the user to understand how the total number of reviews is divided, so how it's distributed. So what I did is I used the review ratings as the category. So that's going to define the columns that I have there. And I'm going to be using the same review count, but in this case, actually, no, my mistake. Instead of using the review rating, I'm going to use the review ID because that allows me to get a distinct count. So in total, we have 7.22K reviews. But if we look at the values, for example, if I create a card, review ID, and make it a distinct, there's 7.21. So there's always going to be some rounding up of numbers that you have to figure out, okay, how do I handle this properly? So what I do with the waterfall chart is I'm going to switch it to pixels. There we go. So it's then these numbers will get a little bit bigger. Yeah, one thing is whenever you are mixing custom visuals and native visuals, make sure that you check if the font sizes correlate according to the same principle. Like for example, one of the things that we allow the users to do is actually to choose whether the sizing model is based on pixels or points. Points is the same that native visuals use. The reason why we even have pixels is because this one allows you to have more control over exactly how they scale. So it's more precise scaling, whereas point system is just a multiplier that you don't really have any control over. So that's one thing. Now, the reason why I went back here is because if you look at the values, you can see that the chart is trying to understand, okay, how do I handle this? Because I have thousands and I have regular numbers. Okay, one way on how I could handle this is I'm actually going to have two decimals. It makes sense when I have thousands. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when I have just whole numbers. And I can't really have half a review, right? So what I can do here is go into the formatting options, find positive changed value labels, because these are increasing values. Also, if you hover over it, you can see by default it shows you positive count of review IDs. If it would be a negative, then we would adjust the negative part. But here we see it's positive, so positive change value labels. I'm going to scroll down into the setting group right here. This is what I'm looking for. And I'm going to say that I don't want to have any display unit, and I don't want to have any decimals. So I'm strictly focusing on the whole number as such. You could, of course, also add the commas, not the comma separator, sorry, but the thousand separators and so forth by creating a formatting for it. Or if it would be a number, it would be a lot easier. In this case, I'm counting distinct values from text, so it's a little bit more tricky. So we have that. Now for the total column, it's a separate column, so total value labels. I just want to make sure that I'm using the same principle everywhere. Scroll down, display unit none, value decimals 0, force it, 7218, okay? So there is a little bit of a discrepancy. I would need to figure out where it's coming from, but that's what the data analysis is all about. So we have it here, but I don't want it to be exactly the same as all these numbers. So what I'm gonna do is say that, hey, the only thing I want you to change it is I want this number to be inside of the column. Because regardless of what is gonna be the value transition, even if it's like this, the number is gonna be within a column. As for the increases, I want them to be on top of the increase. If it would be a decrease, I would probably place it downwards. So you can always play around with this. And the good thing about this is that the users can now easily do, for example, something like this. I can look at the 3-star reviews, and that adjusts the timeline. Now, one other thing that a waterfall visual has that we added to the waterfall is the sequence field. So if we try to sort it, you're going to notice that we don't have any sorting options here. And that is because we're using a different model for how you sort things. So by default, the way that the waterfall is getting sorted is based on the values that you have, and it's starting from the highest value going down to the lowest. So think about it, if you would have ups and downs, it would essentially go as a mountain, right? It starts off, goes upwards, and then it goes downwards, and then you have a total. Now, you can control this by using the sequence field. So in this case, for example, we don't really have a sequence as such, but I have the review counts. So if I'm using the review rating as a sequence field, by default, it's using the count. And you can see it essentially started with the lowest count and going upward to the highest, but that's not what I'm looking for. I actually want Power BI to take the minimum value of the corresponding column and sort it in an ascending order, basically. So now you can see these are sorted starting from 1, going up to 5, and then we have some blank entries. Again, a rating without a rating, I would say, is kind of irrelevant. Sure, we can look at the comments, but from a data validation perspective, this is not a full review. We have comments about it. We can give it to the product team if they want to, but it's not affecting the overall rating because there's nothing in it. So it also allows you to find these outliers. But if I would have not specified, that would be a lot easier to understand rather than just having 130 without any explanation, right? Quite simple. Now, what I did here on top of it is I actually added also a table right next to it. And the reason why I added a table is because it allows me to do something like this. I can choose a particular timeline. I can choose a particular star rating that I want to focus on. I can choose here on a slicer, for example, a particular reviewer. I don't know, there's probably going to be a Mike. There we go. There's always a Mike. So I'm looking at reviews from Mike, 2017 to 18, 4-star ratings. And on 4-star rating, he has reviewed in total 3 different products. And I can open up each of the reviews and take a look at it. If I don't want to focus on a specific review, I remove the filter and I can see that in total, Mike has reviewed 13 products in this specific time period. Overall rating 4.8. So the main idea about the visuals and the reports that you're building is it allows the user to cross-filter the information. Whether it's from one dimension or the other dimension, you give the possibility for the end user to play around with the data. Sure, I could enhance it even further on. I could add a drill-through page. I could add report page tooltips. Go for it. I just didn't do it here, frankly, because I wanted to play around with the very core concepts of the visual, right? So you can do something like this. This sample is something that I'm going to send to the team as well, so you're going to have access to it. The one thing that I always do encourage, though, is, again, don't take this as a template, right? It's going to be very easy for us to spot if you're doing exactly what I just did and just submit it as your own report, right? But take it as a source of inspiration. See how I did things, see how I play around with them, and just create something that's yours. The main idea about this and why I recommend you to do it this way is because you're trying to build your own portfolio. And once you build your portfolio, that's what allows you to showcase your skills to the world. If you're creating copies, trust me, Power BI world, for especially for those who are creating reports, it's very wide, right? It's very universal and worldwide, but still everybody knows everybody in most cases. And when people are reposting a report, one of the most common examples is Injay Park. You can look at him and see the reports that he's created, and a lot of people are reusing his designs and just saying, hey, look what I just created, and without referencing him as the original author. It's not that you didn't learn those skills. That's all good and everything, but don't say that it is your original design, right? Because it just showcases that, well, you don't really know. So take all these reports and samples as an inspiration. Create something that you are proud of and something that allowed you to learn something new. All right, what else? A network chart. Yeah, I wanted to quickly add also a network chart. I'm keeping the same waterfall just to, again, showcase the cross-chart filtering. But the reason I wanted to have a network chart here is because I wanted to showcase you one specific thing. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, again, I noticed this in one of the sample reports, and it was one of our feedbacks. And I think it would be improving the report a lot. So what we're doing is we're going to be using the review ratings as one of the categories for the nodes. And I'm also going to be using the brands as the second category. And the measure, or the value that I'm going to be plotting, is going to be the amount of unique reviews. Okay, the nodes kind of reposition themselves, they're scaling, looks kind of okay on the first glance, right? But then I start to play around with, for example, like a waterfall that's right next to it to filter out the data. So for example, I'm going to click on, I want to look at the values from 1. It's half size. Okay, look at the values of 2. Looks kind of the same. 21 is barely visible. Okay, what happens if I go to 5? And I can see that, for example, Logitech has 831 reviews, Sony has 710. But if I go to sort of like the overview, it's kind of hard to spot them, right? So one of the things you can do on a network chart is you can go into the formatting options, scroll down and find that for each column that you added here, you have a separate category. And the way that they're defined is the first column in the list is category 1, the second is category 2. So in this case, I'm having brands on the second level. So these are the red nodes. Well, reddish nodes. So enable category 2. The reason why I need to enable it is because I'm telling the visual now that I'm going to have individual control over this specific category. So level 2. And I can enable relative sizing. And the reason why this is so important is because you're always, especially in this setup that I did here, right? If I choose one particular value, that is going to be in the center, and that's going to be the maximum value that you could have there. It doesn't necessarily straightforward correlate to the size of everything else. So having the option of having a relative size, I think you can guys agree with me that it's a lot easier to spot the two outliers now. If you want to go and play around with it a bit more, you can also do something like this. So for example, by default, the min and max radius is based on the size, sorry, not the size, but the value. So the higher the value, the bigger the node. If I go the other way around and say that minimum is actually larger than maximum, it gives you the other effect. So now Sony and Logitech, which were the two highest nodes, are actually the smallest ones. And the reason why this is let's say a good feature to know about is because sometimes you want to focus on the categories or products or whatever it is you have in the visual that has the least amount of value. So for example, I want to see the products that bring in the least amount of profit, right? It's not necessarily the highest always that you're paying attention to. So this is what allows you to play around with this a bit more. All right, looking at the time, we're actually starting to run out of it. We don't have a lot of questions. Okay, so there is a question that I want to ask you guys. First of all, were you able to learn something new and useful? For those of you who aren't here for the first time, you know what I mean about this. For those of you who are new, the reason why I ask this is because learning something new is very simple. I could say something very relevant. For example, I don't know, my height is 120 centimeters. Cool. Was it useful? Probably not. So the most important thing for me is, was the session informative, and did you learn something useful? Whilst you're thinking about this, I just wanted to, as always, put out, and I have no shame in this. I'm begging you guys, don't forget to fill in the feedback forms. You have a link in the chat. There's only 3 or 4 questions that we're asking you. The reason why we're asking for your feedback is to understand, was the session interesting? Was it informative? Do you want to change it? Do you want to learn something else? Do you want other topics to be discussed? It allows us to make sure that the quality of the content you are getting is getting better and better, and you're receiving what you're actually coming here for, rather than to have just another, regular sales pitch or something like that. So you're actually associating it with something that's interesting and useful. So yeah, don't forget to fill in the feedback forms. All right. So yeah, did any of you learn something new and useful? Very informative and very useful. My job is done. Now, for me, guys, it's really all about giving it back to the community. I want to make sure that these sessions is not just a waste of time for you, but you're able to actually learn something new. You see interesting things. And one thing that I always encourage you to do is just play around with the visuals. It's not always going to be a straightforward process. It's not always going to be simple. Trust me, we've all been there. We've all done the same things. We've all struggled with even the simplest of things. But playing around with the visuals, trying to figure out certain things is what gives you that knowledge. It's what gives you the way and possibility to upskill, to showcase that you are able to do more than just a regular user. And these challenges is a great way on how you can do that. Well, if you guys learn something new, like I said, that's the most important thing for me. But yeah, please do not forget to fill in the feedback forms, because it allows us to understand if we're on the right track. If we're not getting enough feedback, and if people are not, telling us if we're doing a good job or if we need to change something, it's kind of hard to guess. I think you can all agree with me, right? If I have to just guess what all of you would want to hear, it's a 50-50 chance. If you tell us what you're looking for, it's a lot easier for us to deliver the content that you're looking for. All right. Without the further ado, I'm going to say thank you to all of you. And one last thing, before I sign off, is don't hesitate to submit your reports and get the initial feedback. There is no reason for you to hold on to the report till the very last day and then hope for a feedback that you can improve things at the very last moment. We're always willing to give you that feedback, but just understand us as well. If we're getting 10 submissions at the same time, like, I don't know, half an hour before the deadline, there's no way that we can respond to everybody, because we're going through all of these reports. And for those of you who have received their feedback, you know that it's individually customized. We give feedback based on your actual report. So whoever is working on a report, the moment you feel like, okay, this is the stage where I want to get some more input from the outside, take the report, submit it, let us take a look at it. We're going to give you feedback and you can improve upon it. If you don't want to improve upon it, that's completely fine. That is your submission. We don't control that side. But the sooner you give it to us, the quicker we can give you the feedback and the more you can play around with it. Remember, you're not going for the unicorn of the report, right? You're not trying to build something that everybody loves. You're trying to increase your own skills and win a prize as a side. All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and I hope you have a great rest of the day that's in front of you. Or if it's the evening, have an amazing day tomorrow. All right, everyone. Bye.